thank you for watching. My name is Stephen Hebard. I'm with the Esports Research and Innovation Lab at Prevention Strategies in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm here with Sophie Priest. I'll let you introduce yourself, Sophie.
Yeah, my name is Sophie. I'm the president of the UNCG Gaming and Esports Club. Also an intern at Prevention Strategies, and I'm really interested in mental health and gaming.
We're here with Nick Martin at UNCG. Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself and your history in esports.
Yeah, so I'm a senior here at UNCG doing political science and pre-law. And on the gaming side of things, in 2017, I was the DreamHack Denver champion. And then I proceeded to go on to do Paladins Minor League. And now I've been kind of coasting game to game, currently competing in Valorant as a semi-professional player and also doing Valorant coaching at UNCG.
We're very lucky to have Nick here, and we'll talk more about Nick's achievements here as we go. But Nick, I thought maybe one place that we could get started is if you just shared a little bit about how you got started gaming and moving into like a competitive space.
Yeah, so it kind of came out of nowhere. I did console gaming for a while, and just through that, through just regular playing and achieving like a high rank in things, a high level. I got approached just to do small team stuff, and then that just over time built the doing tournaments, doing like scheduled regular scrims, and then competing at a professional and semi-professional level.
So it really just like kind of took off on its own as you performed. Then the opportunities came knocking at your door.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And I'm kind of curious because the people that I presume will be watching this and listening to us talk are typically going to be new coaches in esports or new sort of entrance into the greater esports ecosystem. And I guess I'm wondering when you were in middle school and high school, if you could just talk a little bit about what that all looked like then for you.
Yeah, it really was like go home, do homework, and then play games all night.
Yeah.
I think for me, at least in middle school and high school, I had this like stigma around gaming where like I didn't really want to talk about gaming in middle school and high school, and I kind of tried to keep those two like lives separately, I would say. So I think kind of breaking down that stigma of games and just esports in general, and trying to normalize it in a space like that is really beneficial for kids around that age.
Yeah, I actually, if you don't mind me pressing, like what was it that motivated you to try to keep those lives separate? I think that's really interesting.
Um, I don't know. I think there's just like that like nerdy stigma behind things where once you like present yourself in that light, it's really hard to get away from it. Everyone's always going to associate you with like games and gaming when sometimes I didn't want to talk about games and gaming. I'd rather talk about other just normal like I would call it like mundane things, just kind of keeping those lives separately and then just going home and kind of being immersed into like a completely different world.
Yeah, and I imagine that for some adults who didn't grow up in the same generation, I would include myself in that, but somebody who's learned a lot over time and has sort of an identity around gaming and competing, um, um, it's probably hard to understand a lifestyle like that for an adolescent. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was definitely, from my parents, it was definitely something that was contested, I should say, like over and throughout time. I would definitely, I would weigh gaming and competing over, academics, stuff like that. As long as I was getting by and I was achieving a decent grade and decent classes in academics throughout middle school and high school, um, that was kind of where I wanted to be and where I would say that it allowed me to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? You're like in competition within game. You're in competition with your parents to try to create the opportunities for yourself, and then your academics, this other sort of um, identity that you have that's the non-gamer part of you that I mean, you're juggling a lot, I would think. That actually sounds like a lot for a 14, 15, 16-year-old person
A
to
lot,
deal with.
a lot of juggling, and I would definitely say that mental health was a big thing. Trying to maintain mental health, and
Yeah.
a big emphasis on parental support. I think having your parents that support you in what you want to do and your dreams and your endeavors is really important.
Yeah.
I think if parents are against what you're doing, it can definitely be a hindrance on your growth and definitely your mental health and trying to figure out, okay, academics are great and I want to still achieve great things in academics, but I also want to follow my dreams and do stuff outside of the academic world.
Yeah. That makes me think about a couple things. And Sophie, feel free to jump in at any time. Don't let me monopolize the conversation. But it makes me think about, there are, presumably lots of very competitive gamers out there who have gotten to where they are without that kind of support, like without a supportive parent. But really, when we think about coaching and we think about the coaching model that our team is trying to implement at the Esports Research and Innovation Lab, we think about the coach fulfilling some of those roles and responsibilities, right? Of providing the kind of support for the goals and the sort of, lifelong objectives that gamers have. And Nick, I don't know what your experience is with coaches or even as a coach, because I know you're doing some coaching now at the collegiate level, but I'd love for you to just maybe put some words on your experience with coaching or as someone who has been coached, and how that support piece kind of plays into not just your ability, right, your competitiveness and your success, but also your mental health.
I think at least from my experience with coaches in the past and at a semi-professional and professional level, I think coaches really have to have a knowledge structure on the game, but also they have to be the biggest factor I would say is that middleman, right? In a lot of these games, you'll have a 3-person squad, you'll have a 5-person squad, even a 6-person squad. So having that middle person that can kind of come in and mediate arguments or differences, and sometimes be the decision maker, the deciding factor in those arguments,
Yeah.
is a big aspect of being a coach. And I also think that a coach has a big role in team cohesion and just maintaining good relationships between the players and being that person where, hey, if I don't like what this person or this player is doing, I can come to my coach, and my coach can be the person that'll kind of talk to the other person, be the mediating factor, or set up something where two people can talk and have an actual good conversation that is productive for the future.
Yeah. And you've you mentioned two things there. I think you mentioned knowing the game, which I think for a lot of new coaches feels kind of scary, right? To think
Yeah.
they need to know the game as well as their students who play maybe as much as you did at that time, right? And
Yeah.
then you also mentioned this really interpersonal sort of environmental piece around creating cohesion, um, resolving conflict. And I'm curious what success, or like what are the attributes of a coach that is successful in creating that cohesion? Like what are the things that they do?
I think obviously being personable is a big factor in all that, and
Hmm.
I think knowing the difference between being friendly and being and showing your authority and your respect is a big key factor of that. I think some coaches fall into this misunderstanding that they need to be the friend or like a very friendly role,
Uh-huh.
in the team, when sometimes they really need to be that stern kind of parental figure and say, look, this is what needs to be done, this is what needs to be said, and kind of guide the direction of the team.
It's almost like there's a time for each, and you have to know when to choose which role to take.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sophie, what
Absolutely.
are you curious about, or what are you hearing as Nick tells us a little bit about, his experience with coaching or with
Yeah.
mental health and his success?
I mean, on one part, it's really interesting to kind of hear your experiences, like as someone who's like the president of the club, to like see what my coaches are doing. So on one hand, that's really cool. Another thing that I'm curious about is like, what do you think are some of the most important things that a coach can do to support their students? Like for me, I've never coached a team before because I'm like managing all the teams instead of coaching them. So,
Mhm.
like with me, for example, who's never coached before, what would you recommend like the most important things for me to do?
I think the biggest thing that a new coach coming into something could do is, um, it's very trial and error oriented, but I think um, trying to find a way to mitigate disagreements and strife throughout the team. I think that's a main contributing factor that, if not done correctly, could blow up the team completely. People don't want to play with each other. People don't want to work with each other, and then you don't have a team to begin with. You don't have a team, to go forward with. I think being understanding each individual player, how they receive criticism and how they receive praise is also a very big factor in going in on that.
Like, you sound like you may have been a part of some conflict in your past. Am I right about that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I've been on the bad end of stuff, the good end of stuff, in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah.
It just happens through experience. Just figuring things out as you go.
Sure. Sure. And it's funny, like, what you're talking about, or what I'm hearing, at least as somebody who's done some coaching in the past outside of gaming and esports, is that it's okay to not be perfect, but there is some trial and error to this. It's about acting with intention, right? It's about,
Absolutely.
like, making connections and trying to create a supportive environment. But again, you're working with people who are extremely competitive. You're working with people who are if you're working with students in middle school or high school, you're working with them during a really sort of intense developmental period, right? And
Mhm.
it's there's challenging interpersonal stuff that you might not even know about. So yeah, do you would you be willing to share any examples of times that you found yourself in that situation?
Oh man, there's been a bunch.
Valorant team.
Probably. Wait, let me think for a second. Has there
Yeah,
been
sure,
anything
sure.
with
I'm really putting you on the spot.
the Valorant team in particular? I think I think this is just going to be more of like a lesson that I've learned, because I played last semester, and then I've done more of a coaching role this semester, and
Mhm.
then I've also played a little bit when we needed it, when we needed subs, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think, as someone who has the most experience, the most time in the game, someone who's pursuing it professionally, I think trying to find the difference between telling someone, look, I know what the problem is, I know how to solve it, and working through with that, and not sounding almost like authoritarian in the way that I
Mm,
go about things. I think that's a big challenge, and something that's definitely created strife throughout our team that I've
yeah.
had to work on myself, because sometimes I'll just be like, someone will come up with an idea, someone will come up with a question, and I'll give them a straight answer. I'll be like, no, that's not what we need to do.
Yeah.
That's bad. And sometimes I think finding or knowing the situation in which you need to explain things, work through your thought process so that that person can understand it better, and go into the future understanding that thought process, and how to think about things is a main contributing factor to um, keeping a team happy.
Yeah. That's really insightful. Um, well, a few things, right? That keeping a team happy is part of the strategy. Like, that
Hmm.
that has to be a part of it. It can't all be business all the time. Um, but I kind of hear, when you use the word authoritarian, instead of taking that sort of domineering, non-democratic approach, actually allowing some opportunity to experiment and learn from
Absolutely.
mistakes, especially when you're somebody that's aspiring to be a professional. Um, and many of the coaches that are out there now, and many of the coaches that will be doing this work in the future, they won't have that expertise. But I think it still applies, right? The same idea that you might have an idea of how a practice needs to be run, or the way that people should work together, or whatever else. And it's important to give some agency or some opportunity to your players to make some of those decisions, even if they might fall on their face.
Yeah, just validating people's thoughts and opinions of the game, and just using, like you said, trial and error to figure out, is this something that we could do in the future, is this something that we can't do in the future, and just walking through that process, even though it takes more time and it might be less efficient. It definitely helps with people's mental health, and just the way that they think about the team and the environment that they're in.
That's awesome. We've talked about mental health several times, and maybe as a way for us to kind of bring this to the end of our short conversation today, is to just take one more second there, because I've heard you say it so many times, it really seems important and relevant. And I think that coaches might feel a lot of pressure to be experts in mental health. And I would push back against that, but I'm curious what you think, Nick, about that idea.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that coaches don't need to be experts in mental health. If anything, I think traditional coaching would be kind of the negative factor towards mental health. But I think just understanding from personal experience just how much taxing mental strife I've had in the past on like my performance, on just various contributing factors to just how I experienced competing. It's definitely been an issue. Just
Mhm.
trying to figure out exactly who needs what and what needs to be said at this time, what needs to be said. Just everything contributes to mental health, performance, interpersonal relationships, all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. And just trying to keep everything light as much as possible, and just understanding, what needs to be more heavy in nature, and what can just be kind of tossed to the side and just be, happy in nature. It's definitely an issue. Definitely an issue, and I'm not sure if I know how to solve it yet.
No,
I don't think
no,
anyone
I
knows.
don't. I don't think Sophie and I expect you to have all the solutions, but I think it is important to hear you say it means a lot to me when I'm winning or when I'm losing, right? And
Oh yeah,
it affects the way that I feel about myself, and it affects the way I feel about my team. Um, and it's like, it's a being a competitive player in esports requires a really strong identity, right? It becomes like what you're about. And when that gets challenged, that's when things get difficult. And I think it's hard for, people either of an older generation that, didn't grow up with gaming or gaming as we know it,
hmm
or, people that just don't know as much about um, competition or video gaming, or, don't have that sort of competitive lens. It's just hard for them to understand what it's like for y'all.
I think you bring up a good point about confidence. I think in gaming in general, and especially as you climb the ladder of just competition in general, I think the distinction between confidence and ego becomes a
Oh,
really big
interesting.
issue. And just trying, and as a coach, trying to mitigate ego and maintain confidence is a big thing, because
Mm,
you know ego can get in the way of things. Confidence is great in game. The more confidence you have, the better you're most likely to do. And yeah, yeah, yeah. Ego is definitely something that can be good in some aspects, but I think for a team wide situation, ego can absolutely destroy and ravage a team environment.
and that conflict shows
Yeah,
up when the egos get big in certain areas, or certain people
absolutely.
start showing up in different ways. So,
You
you know,
need it. You need it on an individual level. You need it on a team level. But there's that certain breaking point that you just kind of have to trial and error to figure out, where once that ego balloons a little too much, you're going to run into
yeah.
issues.
Well, Nick, this is awesome, and I hear how that piece, relates back to the mental health we were talking about. But I'd love to at some point bring you back to talk more with our coaches. Um, when they can speak to their own experiences, I would imagine they have some really um, probably challenging and unique stories related to things like ego and confidence and mental health and conflict resolution, but these sort of like critical interpersonal skills and needs that they have. So I'd love to chat with you more about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sophie, do you have any other questions or anything you want to kind of end on with Nick today before we close out?
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, mental health and gaming and esports is just so crucial and important, especially with mental health sometimes being looked at as something that's not serious in esports, such as like tilt is often viewed extremely humorously, when in reality it's just like a ton of pent up frustration.
Oh yeah.
So I've experienced it before. I'm sure Nick has. It's not
All the
fun.
time.
And just focusing more on those issues, or just things that happen while playing in esports, is something that coaches should be aware of and ready to deal with, and able to let their players know, like, this is normal. It happens, but here's the steps to take, and here's how to do it. And that's something I think that we can really help with our course.
Nick, what's your medicine for tilt?
Yeah.
Medicine for tilt. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily medicine for it, but my rule, especially if I'm playing ranked ladder or whatever, it's if I lose a game, take a break. Just simple as that. I need, and it could be a 5-minute break. It's kind of like the studying thing where they say, you can study for 30, 45 minutes, just take that 5-minute break, walk away from everything, try to get your mind off things, and then come back to it. I think just trying to erase everything that happened in that game and moving on is probably the best thing that you can do. Obviously, keeping the notes on what you need to improve on, stuff like that.
Right.
But just the details of that game, the basis of that game, just erase it out of your mind. It doesn't matter anymore. It's in the past.
Yeah, that's the old sort of adage about short-term memory loss, like just to eliminate what just happened because it's not representative of you as a whole.
Yeah,
That's a tough thing to do in the moment for sure, but that's a
absolutely.
great answer. Well, I just want to say thank you, Nick, and thank you, Sophie, and for all of you all who are listening to this or are hearing this. Let us know how else we can be supportive of you, answer your questions. If there are specific topics that we covered today that you'd like to know more about, let us know, because we'd love to get together and continue these conversations moving forward. All right. Well, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you.